Multilingual Redditors, what is your, they didn't realize I spoke their language story? This happened to my brother and father while they were traveling. Some dude walks up to my brother, thinking he is a local, and starts talking to him in Farsi. When he realized my brother didn't understand, started saying really rude things, about him and my dad being stupid. My dad, fluent in Farsi, comes over, and rips this asshole a second one. The dude feigned being apologetic, and made excuses for his attitude. As he was walking away, he started muttering more foul things about them, but in Turkish this time. Dad speaks Turkish as well, and proceeds to rip him a third asshole. TLDR, there is a man with 3 assholes. I was on a tour bus with my grandmother going to a luau in Hawaii. My grandmother spoke fluent Italian as both her parents were Italian immigrants. 2 young women behind us were speaking to each other in Italian, probably assuming none of the other tourists could understand them. My grandmother told me, I don't speak but a few words in Italian, that they were insulting everyone on the bus. She let it go on a while but just kept getting angrier and angrier as the ride went on. Finally she turned around and told them off, telling them they should be ashamed of themselves for being so rude. They looked so embarrassed and apologized to her profusely. Getting told off by a grandmother on a tour bus was not what they expected. We had a large family reunion dinner at a restaurant and we were all sharing stories. My funny uncle was telling us how he used to pretend he was deaf and his sister would translate. To prove it, he asked the waitress to get the manager. When he came over, my uncle started signing to him, with made-up and exaggerated gestures. My aunt told him that the food was good and the server was excellent. All the while the manager just smiled and nodded. When they were done talking, the manager said in sign language, he spoke ASL and knew it was bullshit. We blew up laughing and my uncle's face turned beet red. I was in a hotel elevator with my wife in Osaka, Japan. The Miyako Marriott to exact. It is a popular hotel for tourists. We were going up the elevator to our room on the 54th floor. It's a high hotel. In the elevator with us is a Chinese family that speaks Cantonese. They must have assumed we were Japanese or some other type of Asian because they started to tease their pre-teen daughter about how badly she needed to take a shit. They were laughing and the mother was teasing her about how, I can almost see it coming out, our floor came first and when it did I turned to them and said good night, in Cantonese. Their face was priceless and we got out of the elevator. My wife called me a jackass while laughing her ass off. Then we got back to our rooms and took a shit too. My girlfriend and I live in Ottawa, Canada. I grew up speaking French my whole life, and she knows enough to understand others speaking. We were in a restaurant, which was relatively empty except for us and another very French couple at a table nearby, close enough to hear their conversation. Eventually the other girl started talking about my girlfriend's clothing, saying things like, mauvais choix, bad choice. I suspect they were visiting from Quebec and just didn't realize that most people here speak a bit of French, but as we were leaving, I turned to them and said, bonne journée, good day. The look on her face still pops into my head occasionally and it makes everything feel right in the world.
Here's one where everyone felt good at the end. When I was living in China, I used to run in this giant park. One morning on one of my runs, I see these 3 young men hanging out by the path. Not too many foreigners in the area, not too many joggers either, so they immediately notice and start talking about me. One guy says, "Is she Russian?" There was a small but significant Russian population in the city, so, not a bad guess. Another guy, "Talk to her." First guy, "Nah, she wouldn't understand." By this time I'm right next to these guys, and I yelled over my shoulder, "Yes, I do," as I ran past. They absolutely lost their shit. I could still hear them laughing after I went around the bend.
When I was stationed in Korea, I was getting a haircut and the hairdresser had like an assistant or a new person helping her get me seated and prepared. She says to the main girl, "He looks like a baby." I have a baby face and was like 22 at the time. I responded in Korean with, "I look like a baby." She was really startled and embarrassed and knocked out of there for the rest of the haircut. The main hairdresser took advantage of being able to talk with me in Korean, though.
Was on both ends as a deaf person myself. On one side, this one time the cashiers at a store realized I was deaf, and so started talking to each other about me when they thought I wasn't looking. They also didn't know I had my hearing aids and could lip read. Their comments weren't anything too negative. It was mostly the typical comments about deaf people by people who were completely clueless about how deafness worked. When I brought my stuff to the checkout, I kindly reminded them that it's a pretty bad idea to talk about somebody thinking that they can't understand what you're talking about, because the chances are that they do in fact understand what you're talking about. The look on their faces were completely classic. On the other side, one time my best friend and I were people watching at the mall, and we randomly started rating the men around us. In sign language, of course. There was this one dude sitting near us and we start rating his looks and his body. I said that he looked like he had a nice butt, and that his eyes were really beautiful, with the color of the deep ocean. So I rated him a 10 out of 10. Then he came over to us, and then told us in sign language, "Thanks for the compliments, ladies. You really made my day, haha." We were both so shocked and embarrassed. Hey.
Was in Germany, and a middle school teacher asked me to come in as a guest for one of her English classes. The teacher introduced me, I said hello and that I was from the US and happy to be in their class. The teacher said, "So do you have any questions in English for an American? What do you think an American is like?" One of the kids near the front says in German, kind of under his breath but definitely loud enough that most of the class can hear, "Fat and stupid." The kids laugh, the teacher turns bright red. I don't know what to do, so I just say, "Of course, many Americans can speak German," in German. The kid almost shit himself. He looked like a baby deer that had wandered on stage at a Beyoncé concert. I thought he was just being a dick and had intended me to understand what he was saying. Apparently though he actually hadn't thought through that an American in Germany in their language class might actually speak their language. Subscribe to the channel, like, and watch other videos.